What's going on, guys? And happy Friday. Now, as you can see, I've got my picture of Mike Tyson and the legendary Customato in the background, and I thought it's only appropriate that we get into some heavyweight boxing today because we've got a big fight coming up tomorrow between Jared Anderson and Ryad Merhy. But rather than just do a straight-up preview and prediction, because I feel like a lot of you guys, like me, see this fight as somewhat of a foregone conclusion where Jared Anderson's going to win. So rather than just state the obvious, I wanted to look at Jared Anderson's profile as a prospect overall and address the question of how good he really is and how far I think he can actually go in the heavyweight division. So what got me thinking about this initially was when I heard Joe Tessitore, the lead commentator for Top Rank Boxing on ESPN, refer to Jared Anderson as the unquestionable consensus #1 prospect in heavyweight boxing, as in everyone agrees that Jared Anderson is the next guy. And BoxingScene.com published a similar article today where they said the same thing. Everyone sort of agrees that Jared Anderson is the next guy in the heavyweight division. But you guys know I follow the heavyweight division more closely than any other, and so I wanted to actually look at, is this true? Is Jared Anderson really going to dominate the division once the Usyk, Furies, Joshuas retire in a few years' time? Is he the next guy? So in order to do that, I think we need to first of all look at his strengths and weaknesses as a fighter. In terms of Jared Anderson's strengths and weaknesses, I'm going to say right off the bat, I'm not convinced by him at all as far as being the dominant prospect that I see coming up right now. In terms of Jared Anderson's strengths and weaknesses, he has a few things that, in my opinion, he does quite well. So he's a big guy, but he's not enormous by the standards of modern heavyweights. He's 6'4", but there are heavyweights who are quite a bit taller than that. But he has the threshold size that you need in heavyweight boxing at the moment. But in addition to that, he has a very, very devastating body attack, which you've seen in a lot of his recent fights. For example, in the last one against Sergey Rodchenko, he was able to get that guy out of there primarily by working uppercuts and hooks to the body. He's got heavy hands, and even though I don't think he has Deontay Wilder-esque punching power, he does have a lot of knockouts. All but one of his fights is ended by KO, so he does have power, but it's more of a heavy-handed bludgeoning power rather than a Deontay Wilder one-hit knockout power. But here's the thing. Jared Anderson also has quite a few weaknesses. For one, he tends to move straight back in a line, keeping his head right in front of his opponent with very little movement side to side. And what that means is he gets hit a lot. He also gets hit a lot when he comes on the inside, and I think that's because he's so confident in his power that he doesn't really feel the need to defend himself as much when he comes forward, and that can be dangerous. Even Tyson Fury yesterday in his press conference referenced the fact that it tends to be the hardest punchers who also have the weakest chins, and the reason for that is often because they're so reliant on their punching power that the defense can sometimes go out the window. And in my view, Jared Anderson is very guilty of that. If you look at his fights, he does get hit quite a lot. If you look at the Jerry Forrest fight, for example, in the first round, it looked like actually he was going to be potentially knocked out in that fight because he got hit with some big bombs. And that's something he's going to need to iron out working forward. His footwork is also very slow and uncoordinated, in my opinion. And if you look at the way that a lot of the bigger heavyweights are able to move these days, that's a big weakness as far as how Jared Anderson matches up with those guys as I see it. The other thing is, and this goes back to his height, he's only got a reach of 78 inches, which sounds like a lot. And if you compare it to heavyweights of a bygone era, that would have probably been fine. But in this era, it's actually probably on the smaller side as far as his arm length, and it doesn't actually mean that he's going to be able to sit on the outside and just jab people to death. He's going to need to work his way inside when he stops fighting tomato cans. He's going to need to be able to also defend himself a lot better on the inside, and so that's why I think the combination of his poor defense on the inside, his lackluster footwork, and the fact that he doesn't have great reach, it's going to be tough to see him at this point in time matching up against some of the slicker boxers that there are in the heavyweight division. Now, does that mean that Jared Anderson is a terrible prospect who has no future? Well, no, it doesn't. If you look at Deontay Wilder, for example, at this stage of his career, Deontay Wilder was fighting arguably a worse standard of opposition than Jared Anderson. And a lot of people were deriding him for his poor boxing skills. A lot of people at that point in time thought that Deontay Wilder was a hype job, that he would go nowhere, and that once he fought anybody who could fight back, he would be found out immediately. But that didn't actually turn out to be the case. And the reason why it didn't was because, number one, I think a lot of people underestimated Wilder's power. And number two, because he had mental strength. He really did. And you can see that in the Fury fight. Emmanuel Stewart actually singled Deontay Wilder out years before he became a prominent name in the division, above Robert Helenius and above David Price, who were the hot prospects at the time. He put Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury as the two guys who were going to go on and dominate the next era of heavyweight boxing. So the point is, in regards to Jared Anderson, being an American prospect with punching power, with a limited skill set, it doesn't necessarily mean that, especially with good management, you can't go on and actually become a world champion and become, at least for a period of time, a feared name in the division. But here's where I have a little bit of a lack of faith in Jared Anderson as far as that comparison with Deontay Wilder goes. You see, because Jared Anderson so far has not exhibited anywhere near the mental strength that Deontay Wilder has. That was the thing that Emmanuel Stewart singled Wilder out for, even more than his punching power. But Jared Anderson has so far fallen short in that area. Now, you can say that he's a young guy, and yes, he is, but the reality is he's talked very openly about the pressure that he's under, how he's struggled to deal with it. He's had his run-in with the law that he's due in court for next week, and he's openly said that dealing with the pressure has made him consider quitting boxing before the age of 28, even before he becomes a world champion. Well, that's only in 4 years' time. So when you're hearing that kind of talk from a guy, it does make you question how tough of a competitor he is mentally, especially when you compare him to someone like Deontay Wilder, who you can say is borderline delusional, yes, but he also has a tremendous amount of confidence in himself that Jared Anderson might be lacking. So that's Jared Anderson's profile in a nutshell, but how does he stack up against the other names out there? Well, here's where I'm a little bit mystified that Jared Anderson is being called the unquestionable top prospect, because if you look at him in comparison to someone else who is on the top-ranked roster, he's miles behind. And I'm talking, of course, about Bakadir Jalalov. You see, that guy, to me, is definitely, I mean, he's in another category to Jared Anderson as far as being an elite prospect. And I think he's the name, really, alongside Moses Italma, that I'm looking at to potentially dominate the future of the heavyweight division. And Jared Anderson is quite a step down from that. I also would put Jared Anderson below Moses Italma at this point in time, which is significant because Jared Anderson, a lot of his flaws are being excused on account of the fact that he's only 24 years old. Moses Italma is 18 or 19, so he's quite a bit younger than Jared Anderson, and in my view, is a more polished, more mentally mature prospect at this stage, despite the fact that he's actually a significant number of years younger than Jared Anderson. And if you also compare Jared Anderson to Daniel Dubois, who most people probably consider now a contender and not a prospect, Daniel Dubois has also accomplished a lot more at roughly the same age. And even though he's had problems, he's had flaws, I would pick Daniel Dubois to beat Jared Anderson at this point in time. I would actually pick Moses Italma to beat Jared Anderson at this point in time. I would absolutely put Bakadir Jalalov ahead of Jared Anderson. So the question is, where does Jared Anderson fit in? And to me, at this point in time, he fits in the tier of prospects alongside the names like Fabio Wardley, Frazer Clarke, maybe even Justice Hooney coming out of Australia. But that's the tier of guys that I would probably put Jared Anderson in at this point in time. So prospects, guys who have potential, but definitely not the unquestionable top names in the division, and probably not even the top prospects out there at the moment. So in conclusion, is Jared Anderson basically someone that I see as having a huge future in the heavyweight division, or do I see him as being a hype job? And the reality is, to me, I think it's too early to tell. I think that is the cold, honest truth. I don't think he immediately steps out as being the top guy because I think his skills are very limited. I think his quality of opposition is very limited. I think he's been kept away from a lot of the other big name prospects in the division who tend to be based over in Europe or in the UK. And I also think he's got a lot of red flags as far as his headspace and where that's at. Having said that, he does have physical size, punching power, and the backing of one of the shrewdest promoters out there who can potentially maneuver him into a title in the same way that Deontay Wilder was maneuvered into a title. And eventually, he developed enough as a fighter where he was actually able to become a serious threat, and at one point considered to be one of the top 2 heavyweights in the world. So that's my thoughts on Jared Anderson, guys. I see him as a prospect, an interesting prospect, but definitely not the top name, unquestionably, and definitely a heavyweight who still has a lot to prove before we can put a label like that on him. So guys, in the comments, let's list out the names of the heavyweight prospects that you guys feel are going to actually have the best chance of dominating the scene moving forward once Usyk, Joshua, AJ, these guys have retired. Which of the prospects right now, and you can include Dubois, whoever you want, but what are the names that you guys think are going to dominate the heavyweight division in the decade going forward? Thank you as always for watching, guys. I will catch you in the next video.